Okay, now with most of the core systems of our game set up, we can start putting in an actual objective. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a horde spawner right here at the end of the level. So when the player reaches here, they can activate the horde and then fend it off for a minute. And then once they fend it off, they can take this elevator up to the top where the win state of the game is. All right, so the first thing that we'll do is, the first thing I'm going to do is actually place the spot where it'll kick off the horde. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new cylinder, and I'm just going to scale it up a little bit so that this will be the space in which the player can set off the horde. And under prefabs, I'm going to create a new folder, call it materials. And in materials, I'm going to create a new material, and we'll call this checkpoint. And I'm just going to make it, let's say, red. And I'm going to change the alpha to something like this, so it's a little transparent. And it'll be transparent. Okay, and I'm going to put that on our cylinder. Maybe we can make this a deeper red. Okay, something like that is good. So this is the little space that the character can run into to set off the horde. We'll call it checkpoint. I'm going to put it inside of our game manager. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it an FSM. We'll call this FSM checkpoint. And inside of this FSM, we're going to give it a few states. First will be its initialization state. Then we'll have one where it's just wait for player. And then we have the horde warning. And then we have spawn horde. And then we have begin countdown. And once the horde's over, we'll have these last couple states: open portal and warp player. So after all of that, we finish off with our win state. All right, so let's set these up. In initialization, this is where we're going to put some stuff for our UI, but we haven't gotten to the UI yet. So let's just move to wait for player, which is where we'll put a trigger event. And it's going to be when we collide with the player. We'll store the player in a new variable that we could just call player. And when we do collide, it'll go to next. And next sends off to the horde warning. Okay, and here's where we're going to put a set material color. And we're going to change this to yellow. And that way when the horde kicks off, this turns yellow. So we're going from red to yellow, and then by the end of this, when the countdown ends, this will turn green. Here's also where you could put in an audio play. And say, for example, you could put in your horde music. I'm going to go ahead and add this audio source component. And we're not going to wait for the end of the clip if you decide to use this. So now would be a good time to start setting up the canvas that'll have our UI and other such announcements, because this is where we're going to want to put in some text on screen. So over here in the scene, I have our UI canvas, and I'm just going to go ahead and create a new UI panel. I'm going to call this our Horde panel, and I'll frame up on it, hit 2D so we can look at it a little bit more easily. I'm going to change our aspect to 16:10, it's a common aspect ratio. That way we can scale this and always have a good sense of what our screen is going to look like. Now in our Horde panel, we're going to want to put in the text that says that the Horde has kicked off, and we'll also put in the timer to show how much time is left for the Horde. So I'm going to right click on the Horde panel, go to UI and text, and I'll call this Horde text. And I'll duplicate that and call this one timer. Okay, so I'm going to write out timer for this one, and then I'm going to center the alignment and center it. I'm going to go ahead and move it up here, Now, Unity's default text isn't the best, and a lot of times you'd want to be using Text Mesh Pro. But if you ever do just want to go with the basics here, you can always increase the font size and go ahead and expand your width and height, and then just bring down the size of the object. And that way it's a little more crisp. And we'll increase the width just in case we need a little bit more room. Same thing with the Horde text. I'm going to go ahead and crank up the font size and change the width and the height, and maybe bring this down a little bit more. I'm going to center it up, scale this down, and we'll move it just below the timer. We'll give this a lot more room because we're going to want to write out some notifications on here. You can also use this rect tool to stretch it out this way. And this will just say Horde text. And what we'll have in our checkpoint is an activate game object that will turn our Horde panel on. So I'm going to drop our Horde panel in here. Game object, activate game object, and it's going to be activated, but we're going to turn recursive off. Okay, and the reason we need this action is because after all this, we're going to deactivate it, so it'll be off. But for now, while we work with this, we're going to keep it on. Okay, so in our checkpoint, it activates that Horde panel, and we're going to put in a UI text set text, and the game object will be our Horde text. And we'll say something like, hold them off for 1 minute. We'll put in another UI text set text. And here we'll put in our timer. And we could say, get ready. Okay, and then after this, we'll just put a little wait action at the very bottom here. And we'll wait 3 seconds. And when it finishes, we'll go next, add this, and then we'll come here. So in the spawn horde state, what we're going to want to do is spawn zombies that are already chasing us, because that's the whole point of the horde, is that it draws attention to you, puts all the heat on you, and you have to defend yourself. So we're going to have to run through another spawning system. This one could be a little simpler though. We're going to have to do some setup in our scene by, let's see, framing up on the checkpoint. Okay, so this is the area that we're going to be defending ourselves in. So what we can do is come over here, and around the corner we can 3D object, sphere, and it's just so I can see where it is in the world right now. We're going to put it around the corner so the zombies are spawning just out of sight. And what I want to make sure of too is that there's going to be, if I select on navigation, yeah, see I have some navigation around the corner. So if you don't have your nav mesh baked out over here, make sure you get that done too. So I'm going to put this right on the nav mesh, but just out of sight for the player. And I'm going to name this Horde Spawn. And I'll duplicate it. And I'll put another one, let's say, if the players are over here, we can also even put one around the corner. Maybe even just over here, a little out of sight. This is totally up to you. And what I'll do is select both of them, create an empty parent, and I'll call these HordeSpawners. And I'll put this inside of Game Manager as well. I'll actually put it right underneath our zombie idle spawns. So we have 2 sets of spawners. And if I go ahead and frame up on it, I can select our checkpoint, and what we'll do is do a get random child, and it'll be getting a random child from our horde spawners and storing it as a random spawn point. And then we'll create object, and we're going to create a zombie, drag and drop our zombie prefab in here. We're going to set our spawn point as the random spawn point. And under parent, we could change it to currently spawned zombies. And just so we don't forget, I'm going to come over here to our initialize state, and I'll do a get FSM game object. And we'll be getting this from our game manager, our zombie manager, our currently spawned zombies. Okay, and we're going to be storing that as our currently spawned zombies. I'll add a finish state right here, send off to the next state. Okay, so back here in spawn horde, this is just to make sure that our zombies are being created in the same way that our idle zombies are being created. Over here in store object, I'm going to call this our last zombie spawned. And then we're going to do a set FSM bool, and we're going to tell the last zombie that we just spawned in its zombie FSM that it's a horde zombie. Okay, so this will be a bool value that will set to true. We haven't created this bool in our zombie yet, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this text, and I'm going to come over to our zombie, and right here between the start and the idle point, I'm going to put in a new state called horde check, and we'll do a bool test, and it'll be a variable that I'll paste in this text, spelled exactly the same way. Remember, that's very important. I have to say it every single time. Create variable, and if it's true, put true, and if it's false, go ahead and put false. So if it is a part of the horde, then it's just going to chase the player. It goes right to chasing the player. If it's not a part of the horde, it's a normal zombie that gets spawned at the beginning of the game, and it just continues onto the idle states. Okay, so back at our checkpoint, says it creates that zombie and then tells it it's a part of the horde, and then we're going to loop through this, let's say 10 times. So it's going to create 10 zombies. And for loop event, going to put in loop event. It'll send back to itself. And finished event will go next, which will send off down here to begin countdown. Now at begin countdown, we're going to have a wait state, and it'll be waiting for, let's say, 5 seconds. And after 5 seconds is up, we're going to do a new event called repeat. Okay, and that'll send back up to spawn horde. So it'll create an additional 10 zombies every 5 seconds. While we're here, we're going to do a bool test and a get FSM bool. And they're going to be checking for when our timer is done to send off to the next state. Okay, but in order to do that, we need to create a timer. So I'm going to come over here. I'm actually going to move our audio source above our FSM like this. That way we could see our FSMs down here a little bit more easily. I'm going to create this new FSM, and this is going to be our timer. Okay, and inside of our timer, I'm going to have wait action. It'll take 60 seconds, and when it's done, we'll have next. That'll send off to the next state. And then in this state, we'll have a set bool value. Set bool value. And the bool will be timer complete. The bool value will be set to true. Time's up. And counting down. All right. Now, by default, our timer will be off. And here in our checkpoint, the begin countdown state, if I drag and drop our timer FSM in here, I could do state machine, enable FSM. I'm going to turn off reset on exit, but I will enable it here. Okay, so it's off by default, but when we come to the begin countdown state, it'll be enabled. And the timer will start counting. Once that timer is up and its bool for the timer being complete is set to true, we can send off to a new state. So let's get that from, So let's get that from our timer, the timer complete, and I'll even copy this, paste it into a new bool variable. This will be checking every frame, and so will this. and it's the timer complete. And if it's true, then it'll go to next. And we just won't do anything if it's false. So if it's true, you get sent to the open portal state. So we're creating 10 zombies every 5 seconds. That might be a little excessive. So what we could do is maybe change this to 10 seconds. 10 zombies every 10 seconds. Now another thing that we want to do is actually set the timer. So if we come up here to timer, another way of making a clock or a wait state is to do a float subtract. So if we get rid of this wait state, we can create a new variable called timer, and we'll subtract 1 every frame per second. And we'll set this timer float to 60. So this is another way of setting a 60-second countdown. The benefit of this one, though, is that now we have a readout of exactly how many seconds are left. And it's time moving in reverse as opposed to a wait state, which we might perceive as counting from 0 to 60. So here's where we can do a UI text set text. And we could specify our timer. In the text, we can come down here to convert timer. And we'll set this to every frame. Okay, now I want to show you what this looks like when we run it. So what I'm going to do is take our player, and we'll just go ahead and skip all this, bring them straight to the checkpoint. And that way we can test this a little bit more easily. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and deactivate our Horde panel, and let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. Right off the bat, we have a problem. Can you guess what it is? It is the fact that we did not set this to isTrigger. Okay, how about now? Boom. Get ready, hold them off for 1 minute. Okay, now here's the thing I wanted to show you, is that this countdown timer is displaying all of these milliseconds between the seconds, which just doesn't look so good. And on top of that, by the way, take note of the fact that our panel has taken over the entire screen. I don't think we want that either. So let's go ahead and stop this. And the way we can change the format of the countdown timer is by coming into checkpoint and using a convert float to string. And we'll put that just before the set text. We're going to be converting our timer float to a new variable that we can call timer_string. And the format for it, we'll just put in 2 zeros. And that 2-digit entry will tell it to be formatted to only 2 digits. We're going to be setting this to every frame as well. Okay, and the timer, we can now instead choose this timer string. Okay, but now that we have this float subtract method, we need to put in a float compare at the very bottom here. And we'll just compare our timer to 0. And when it's equal to or less than, we'll go to next. So equal to or less than, and that's every frame. Okay, so this will tell us when our timer's up, and it'll get sent here. I'm going to come over to our Horde panel. I'm going to activate it, and to be honest, I think we could just get away with changing the color of our text to something like yellow. Same thing with the Horde text. Okay. Now, these things will live in our Horde panel still, but now we can change this to a transparent Horde panel. And that way, the text will just pop up. Okay, so let's go ahead and deactivate that for this test. Let's see how our timer works. Come over, activate it, get ready, hold them off for 1 minute, waits a few seconds, and there goes the timer. And we just got some zombies spawn. There should be some boys coming from that side too. There they are. And there's some more that are coming. And they're just going to keep on coming. Now, at this point, you may want to consider really limiting the amount of zombies you have, because as you can see, I'm taking a bit of a performance hit. But there you go. We've just reached the end of the Horde, and if we come over to our checkpoint, to our checkpoint FSM, we got to the open portal state. Okay, Now, in our open portal state, this is where we'll make it so if the player actually reaches here after the 60 seconds, they get taken to this roof where they get the end game win screen with some stats about their performance. So the way we could start with this is by copying our set material color and pasting it in here, this time changing it to green. And we'll put in the same trigger event, copy this, put it in the open portal, and we'll add this next transition, send it off to warp player. But we also want a UI text set text, so I'm going to go ahead and copy these UI text set text and paste them in here. And for the horde text, we could say get to the roof, and the timer will just clear that out so it doesn't display anything. And then once we warp the player, we can actually take this horde panel and game object, activate game object. We'll just deactivate it now. So the horde panel will turn off, and to put our player on the roof, what we can do is get position and set position. And what we'll do is come up to the rooftop, and here is where I can add in a sphere, and I'll just put it like right here. Okay, I'll turn off this mesh render, delete this sphere collider, and this will be the roof spawn. Okay, now in our checkpoint, I'll specify the game object as roof spawn. So we're going to get the position of this. We'll store it in a new variable called roof spawn underscore v3, and that's in world space. And then we're going to set the position of the player to the roof spawn v3, and that's going to be in world space. And then finally, once that's done, in the win state, we'll have a send event that is going to send to the game manager in info win. So in our game manager info, we can put some win conditions here. But let's check if our teleport works for our player. I'm also really quick just going to change this checkpoint timer to something like 10 seconds. So I only have to wait a little bit when we do this test. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and play it. Alright, gonna set it off. Okay, get ready, hold them off for 1 minute. Waiting 10 seconds, it's yellow for now. Oh, by the way, the color in the variable, we could set the transparency as well, so we could fix that. Alright, get to the roof. So now I gotta do is come over here, and now I'm on the roof. Alright, so that all checked out. Let's set up the win conditions. In the game manager, in win conditions, we can have some enable FSMs, and we will specify the player. We'll say player movement gets disabled, and we'll leave reset on exit, so that way when we actually reset the game, the player gets the movement back. We'll also reset player look, player crouch, and player shoot. Okay, so all these things are going to get turned off, and here is where we'll activate the panel that displays all of the player stats. So let's actually make that now.